Hello everyone and welcome to the Eddie Proudfoot podcast. Today on our third episode, we're going to explain ability scores in Dungeons & Dragons, what they are and how to use them. So let's get started. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there are 6 numbers which completely describe how good and bad your character is at basically everything in the game. These numbers describe your physical and mental abilities. They are in order: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Now, what do these really do? Well, if you ever need to test your physical abilities, you're probably going to be rolling some kind of strength check. If you are trying to dodge, do some crazy acrobatics, or maybe sneak past someone, you're probably rolling a dexterity check. Constitution would mainly come up if you potentially eat some really bad food, or if you're traveling long distances and pushing yourself beyond your ability, you might have to do a constitution kind of check. With mental checks, they come up in a lot of different ways. Intelligence, probably if you're trying to know something about the environment you're in, a past historical event, or maybe even a religion you've come across. Wisdom would come into play if you're trying to observe things about your environment very articulately, if you are trying to decide the true intentions of another character in the game, perhaps a non-player character, or if you are trying to handle any animals. These are all things that come up with wisdom. And finally, charisma is basically any time you are trying to sway another individual to see your opinion, deceive them, or potentially entertain this person. These are all examples of how charisma comes into the game. These abilities have numbers that go from 1 to 20, 1 being the absolute worst you could possibly be, and 20 being the absolute best you can possibly be. These numbers themselves do not fully characterize how they're used in the game, but we'll get to that later. First, how do you determine what your numbers are going to be? Well, there are many different ways that your DM could ask you to do this, but the most common and the most popular method that is explained in the book is to roll 4 6-sided dice, take the 3 highest of those 4, add them together, and drop the lowest. Do this 6 times and it'll give you 6 numbers. Then you are free to assign them to whichever ability scores you like. Now, that's what ability scores are. They're going to tell you how you perform inside the game when you're playing it, but how do we use them? Well, anytime you roll a d20, you're going to be adding what is your ability score modifier to the roll. It's whichever one mostly applies to that roll specifically, and we'll talk more about these types of rolls in later episodes. The important thing to know now is that ability scores are not just the score, they have a modifier, and this is what you use. So the modifiers range from -5 to +5. They are associated with every single score. There's a table on page 13 and 173, the player's handbook, which shows you this association. Or you can remember this formula, which is to take your ability score, subtract 10, divide by 2, and then round down. Once you do that, you'll know what your modifier is. You don't need to compute this every time. Once you determine your ability scores, just write down the modifiers on your character sheet as well, and then you can just simply refer to them when they come up. For example, though, if your ability score is 15, let's say, you subtract 10, that gives you 5. Then you divide by 2, which is 2.5, round down gives you 2. Or if you're on the other side of 10, say you have an ability score of 9, subtract 10 gives you -1, divide by 2 gives you -0.5, and then you round down back to -1. So this is how you can use that formula to determine your ability scores. Now, whenever you make a d20 roll, you will add this modifier if it's positive or subtract it if it's negative. So if you had 9, you'd be subtracting 1 from whatever your d20 roll is, or if you had 15, you'd be adding 2. This will enhance or impede your roll in a certain sense, depending on how good or bad you are at the specific ability. The 3 ways that these ability modifiers are used is anytime you're rolling a d20 in the game. And there are 3 types of rolls that you make with a d20, and those are attack rolls, saving throws, and ability checks. We'll explain all 3 of these in later episodes. The important thing to know now is that they are modified by your ability score, and it's the specific one that applies to the situation. So if you're attacking someone with a longsword, you're probably going to be using your strength modifier. If you are trying to sneak past someone, you're probably going to be using your dex modifier. And if you're lying to someone, you're probably going to be using your charisma modifier. So this has been a short explanation of ability scores in Dungeons & Dragons. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know by following us on Instagram, Spotify, or Twitter. And as always, may the gods have mercy on your soul.